the throes of the pandemic. Now, what do we understand by the word performance? So, in his book, The Performance Studies and Introduction, Richard Sechner says, performance is the whole constellation of events that takes place in and among the performance and audience. It should be construed as a broad spectrum or continuum of human activities, including plays, sports, popular entertainment, performing arts, and everyday life performance. That would be my focus here. Enactment of social, professional, gender roles, class roles, and so on. Max Herman describes performance as a game in which everyone, actors, spectators, are participant. The term performance, therefore, used here to denote the blurring boundaries of a traditional understanding of performers-audience relationship and how the current social behaviors could be understood through the light of these theatrical concepts. Further, performativity is related to the concept of theatrem mundi, or the theatre of the world, where the entire human life and the world is taken together to classify as theatre. The term performativity is a way of capturing the current nature of human behavior in the way of the virus outbreak. The sociologist and performance theorist Irving Goffman suggests in his well-known book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, where he discusses a connection between performance and everyday life by using the metaphor of theatrical performance to highlight the importance of role-playing in everyday social life. The corona warfare, in Goffman's sense, is a performance. Further, Erica Fisher-Lish, in her book, The Transformative Power of Performance, writes that performances are characterized by their eventness and suggests that in a performance, the spectators are also participants of the event. Therefore, the eventness of the disease is more apparent and participants experience themselves as subjects who partially control and are partially controlled by the conditions neither fully autonomous nor fully determined. It is much evident that current pandemic is no longer a natural phenomenon, but it associates with many political, cultural nuances which cannot be analyzed through medical or scientific knowledge. The systemic structure in the development and developing countries have collapsed, and the heads of the countries have now thrown into confusion and cacophony. Each country is devising ways to counter it and to limp back to normalcy. J.L. Austin, in his book How to Do Things with Words, established the speech act theory. He writes, to say something is to do something. And he uses two concepts, locutionary act, to communicate something, and illocutionary act, which is a performative act. So then in that sense, we can say corona, a wartime imagery, is very often used by all the states to define the pandemic, and these imageries are very compelling. We have taken recourse to a persistent and sustained symbolism, a kind of a sensationalist language and hyperbole in identifying the virus as enemy, flattening the curve as strategy, healthcare personnel as frontline warriors. Lakoff and Johnson, in their work Metaphors We Live By, write that the common metaphors in politics come from war and sports. In February 2020, the Chinese president declared China's response as a people's war. Following this, in March, the US President Donald Trump termed himself as a wartime president and compared the response required to combat the coronavirus akin to World War II. Similarly, Pakistan's President Imran Khan also gave a response as war against the virus. Hungary Prime Minister did not hesitate to connect the virus to migration. He said, we are fighting a two-front war. One front is called migration and the other one belongs to coronavirus. There is a logical connection between the two as both spread with movement. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said, we have passed the COVID peak. Orders World War II parade in the month of June. And the Turkish president similarly publicized this hashtag mission accomplished against coronavirus outbreak, saying that the investments in the country's health system, a science-led approach to managing the disease, and free treatment meant that the pandemic has been contained. On a somewhat similar note, in India, on March 24th, the Prime Minister declared a lockdown. And Narendra Modi then compared it to an 18-day long historic Mahabharat battle. All this performative utterance by all these heads of state that I mentioned, by these world leaders, use of an over-dramatic expression like war and the killer on the loose intensifies our threat perception and serves to amplify fear amongst people. The personification of the virus as an adversary allows us to comprehend our encounter with a non-human virus, perhaps rendering it tangible at some level, fits in J.L. Austin's definition of the capability of language as a mode of action, not just as a mode of description. It is only fair, therefore, to go after it, to conquer it, for destroying our economy and our livelihood. So, countries are at war, or winning the battle, or losing the battle, as it is our big war. Language becomes a particular kind of instrument between people, and that literal meaning is not the only use of language. All types of political systems have relied on spoken word to convince others of the benefits that arise from the leadership. Charteris Black in Politicians and Rhetoric writes, all types of political systems have relied on spoken words to convince others of the benefits that arise from the leadership. In February, a video of the Union Minister Ramdas Athawale, the Chinese Consul General, and the Buddhist monk chanting Go Corona, urging coronavirus to take a back step at a prayer meeting went viral on social media. The video was reportedly shot at the Gateway of India at a prayer meeting in a prayer session to stop the spread of coronavirus. Further, another video clip of Ramdas Athawale, whose Go Corona slogan reverberated against social media, resurfaced again. While in this video, the politician was urging people in his archetypal way to stay inside their homes to halt the spread of the deadly virus and defeat it. The leader is heard imploring people not to get scared of this virus, instead to kill it. And he said, "Aap bilkul mat rona, kuch din baad चला जाएगा कोरोना कोरोना को मत डरो ना कोरोना को अभी 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 मारो ना," and so on. So the minister's performative utterance can be seen as transformative performatives, which according to Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick is geared to a style and amendment of personal and environmental status, or promissory performative, which describes the world as it might be in the future. C. Hugh Holman says, we create a world in the act of perceiving it, to raise the spirit, but it is hard to see how useful this can be against a non-traditional human security threat. The traditional militaristic national security narratives are all about dealing with traditional enemy states, where overpowering the other has become a key element, and any scientific discussion is a casualty. It is true that everything today is a war against terrorism, war against corruption, a war against COVID-19. We are always in search of an enemy, the other. Can we deny the fact that there seems to be a correlation between increase in the use of war, battle, and violence in society? Toxic masculine nationalism feeds off such usage. In a way, the two reinforce each other. Antonin Artaud, I've mentioned the work Theatre and His Double. In his Theatre of Cruelty and Theatre and His Double, conceptualizes a theatre that, like plague, acts upon a large group of people and disturbs them all in a same way. It does not discriminate. Artaud thought that theatre would impact on everyone and anyone. And for that, you do not have to be of a certain class, gender, race, or a certain background to enjoy the theatre or to be moved by it. When people went to the theatre, they were united in that they were all there to be delighted in the performance. However, this is not the case. While the virus is dominating the news space in all parts of the world, there is little evidence of the crisis leading to a more collective, humane response, where prejudices, bigotries that divide human beings are shelved, at least temporarily. In each country, those controlling the states are seeing the fear resulting from pandemic as an opportunity to reinforce the ruling ideology. As COVID-19 spreads, a tsunami of misinformation, hate, scapegoating, scaremongering has been unleashed. The case of Tablighi Jamaat congregation in Nizamuddin area in New Delhi unfortunately became a vector of coronavirus, provided a perfect excuse for demonizing a certain community. After first putting on a religious color, the pandemic soon engulfed the people on the basis of caste and class. Seen historically, this coronavirus-induced bigotry fits alongside several past incidents from across the world where pandemic or similar crises have given rise to such discrimination. Part of the process of finding scapegoat, situating blame, the spread of bubonic plague or the Black Death in the 14th century, Europe was blamed on that happened in Europe. They blamed Jews, Africans, and Asians. Similarly, the spread of the 2009 swine flu pandemic in US was blamed on the Mexicans. The spread of the cholera in US was blamed on the Irish immigrants, so much so that it eventually came to be known as the Irish disease. In India, though the burden of the coronavirus fell squarely on certain community due to hate propaganda, they weren't the only ones to be discriminated against. There were many instances when people from different states were racially abused, spat on, targeted, and even called corona. Very recently, we know that the train that reached West Bengal was dubbed as Corona Express. As Michel Foucault argues, plague or pandemic is wielded as a political and oppressive apparatus to identify and stigmatize certain groups of society, and how the medical institutions' governance would be redefined and operated as an epistemological tool of surveillance of people's sickness and well-being. Contagion is a 2011 American thriller film directed by Steven Soderbergh. The plot concerns the spread of the virus transmitted by the respiratory droplets and fomites. Attempts by medical researchers and public health officials to identify and contain the disease, the loss of social order in a pandemic, and the introduction of the vaccine to halt its spread. In films like Contagion, when the calamity strikes the world, individuals from different countries rise above national loyalties and work together to overcome and reaffirm their shared humanity. If only it were so in the real world. The coronavirus pandemic is exploring the slippery underpinning of a globalized world where the spread of the virus is globalized but responses to it are along nation-state lines, with big powers like China and US playing blame game and propaganda. The pandemic has highlighted the dangerous and growing inequalities that exist between countries and within them. Susan Sontag, the American literary critic, wrote in her work Illness as Metaphor, and she coined the term imagination of a disaster. She used to describe to the vocabulary, language, myth, folklore of a disaster and its ability to generate a framework of meaning and understanding. Sontag was against the use of metaphors in illness. She saw it as a dangerous trend that makes the disease vulnerable. As the spread of COVID-19 in India is seen as jihad, we can see the impending violence the metaphors can engender. It can be that our fondness for virus as metaphor has made it difficult for us to see viruses as potentially dangerous, even lethal, biological phenomena. In turn, our discrimination to see viruses as literal may have kept us from insisting on observing standards and practices that would prevent the spread of the virus. Enthralled with virus as metaphor and the terms associated with it, spread, growth, reach, connectedness, we cease to be as vigilant as we should be. Uh, Now I come to the next point, symbolism of performance. The stage is a symbolic place. The activities it engenders and embraces even more richly and complexively slow. As in the making of the play, its composition and subsequent production is also a symbolic act. And people and the people the drama welcomes to, its interpretation, execution, and presentation, participate in that world symbology whether they care or not. The theatre phenomenology is, for the most part, taken for granted by its practitioners, a given of its ways and means, the best done rather than talk about. So, the theatre symbolism or symbolism per se, a part of the playhouse vocabulary, its daily rhetoric, a grammar of practice. For example, blood in Macbeth stands for guilt. Skull in Hamlet reminds us that we will all die. Cloak symbolizes of mourning. Handkerchief and candle in Othello, Hamlet's swords, are all charged with meaning during the process of the play. So symbols march into stage to signify not only their corporeal being, but their sense of the other, their trace in the Davidian sense of the vision behind the technique, creating a charged relationship with the audience. During the lockdown, at the behest of the minister's calling, lakhs of people around the country had taken to their windows and balconies and eventually to the streets to observe his call for solidarity by beating thalis and sorry, I have to go there. Thalis and talis as a gesture of appreciation for the health and medical professionals at the forefront of the COVID fight. The act of lighting diyas and mombattis, turning on candles and torches at 9 p.m. for 9 minutes for the frontline health workers was a populist propaganda invoking Hindu mythologies as a prescription to prevent coronavirus transmission, being similar in nature to the Hindu festival of Navaratri, which spans 9 nights. These performative acts are received acknowledgement and indulgence from common masses and mainstream media at large, legitimizing these acts under the garb of solidarity for the corona workers. The well orchestrated performative act of banging the thalis and talis to express solidarity for healthcare workers intended to generate specific objective, manifesting itself through the rhetoric. Thalis and candles are not just a source of utility. They are now tools for sustaining social hierarchy. At the top is the ruling class, the politicians, and at the bottom are these laborers, the wretched of the earth, having no access to these privileges. While the entire country was banging plates and lighting candles, thousands of migrant workers from all over the country were forced to work to their places of shelter because there was no food available on their plates and no candles to light up their homes. I come to the other part that I call gender class performativity. So, gender itself is performative. We are all the time performing. As Simone de Beauvoir has famously said, one is not born a woman, one becomes one. There can be no gender identity before gendered acts. It is the acts that continuously constitute the identity. Butler wrote that nobody can be a gender before doing the gendered acts. And as we know that the coronavirus pandemic has widened, or one would say made visible, the gendered class performative. Now, gender again is not a holistic or homogeneous terms. There are intersectionalities, as I have mentioned in the title here. So these intersectionalities became more visible. On the one hand, we had the performatives of the middle class, comfortable, cozy class that was, you can see this girl with her laptop doing her classwork or maybe an online class. So we had images of women or people doing yoga, their personal gyms. They were posting pictures of pandemic recipes and so on. Or even in Facebook, there was the post a photo of your sari photo and so on. And on the other hand, we had images of this. One image you can see is a 13-year-old Jyoti Kumari. In the pillar is her father, and she's cycling from Gurugram to Darbhanga. It's almost 1,100 kilometers. The distance she covers, this distance in cycle. So the contrast, the gender, divide and the class divide becomes very, apparent in the performatives that were very visible in media now. The second important issue that comes to my mind during this pandemic, issue of the gender relationship is the divide between the home and the public and the private. Tennyson wrote, "Man for the field, women for the herd, and man to command and women to obey." So the public and the private spaces are very wide apart. Wide apart. So Caroline Pateman says, in the feminist critique of the dichotomy between the public and the private, she says this is central to 2 centuries of feminist writing and political struggle, the divide between public and private. Now, what has happened? The public has collapsed, and everything has become the private space. Everyone is working from the private space. So, what happens when everyone is working from home? Then, is it going to benefit women? So, my larger question is: the gender role world over have placed domestic work on women's shoulders, which is socially and culturally often demarcated as women's work. Now, shelter at home, we are all sheltering at home, has collapsed this dichotomy as never before. For some women, the lockdown has almost tripled the amount of work because everybody is at home, and with housekeeping staff still being unavailable, the expectation for a woman is to bear a lot of work. And of course, it has thrown up a lot of things, violence, a lot of gendered violence that is happening in home spaces also. The positive side of it could be that the acceptability of work from home has come. So maybe in the long run, this would benefit women. For a post-COVID scenario, one can question if women workers will still benefit from the added flexibility in combining career and childcare needs. If there is a persistent increase in the ability to work from home for women and men alike, how will the division of labor in the household change? Now, we often see pictures, and a lot of men are also posting pictures of helping their wives with washing dishes or with cooking. So, is it going to be, is it going to sustain? Is this kind of sharing work going to be sustained? Further, the social stratification, the intersection between class and gender is split wide open. As I said, these 2 images can tell you the split. Millions of migrant women the world over, the frontline, they work in essential but low paid vulnerable jobs as healthcare workers, in farms, as cleaners, laundry workers, placing them at high risk of exposure to the virus. They already have to grapple with multiple intersecting forms of discrimination and equality. The jobs are generally excluded from contributory social insurance schemes, which mean limited or no social safety nets to compensate for lost income, and limited or no access to healthcare and maternity protection. We hear of horrifying stories of pregnant migrant women giving birth to babies at bus stops, in public transport systems, and so on. With mandatory mask and self-quarantine ritual, the whole society is becoming more performative than ever before. Although theatre, film screening, and other entertainment venues are closed for public gathering, they are becoming part of a nationwide performance. And this performance is projected to the global audience through World Wide Web and local media. Therefore, the whole nation is stepping into, if I may use Victor Turner's term, liminal state, where the in-betweenness of coronavirus infection is experienced and performed. By liminal activity, Turner, in his work From Ritual to Theatre, The Human Seriousness of Play, means that something that is an in-between state, a border, a margin. Defining the liminal, Turner says, liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between, the positions assigned and arrayed by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. Thus, liminality is frequently linked to death, to being in the womb, to invisibility, to darkness, to bisexuality. Similarly, theatrical performance as liminal work have potentiality to create new possibilities and transformative power to effect change in individuals and in society. Anthropologist Arnold van Gemp, in his book The Rites of Passage, describes three stages of liminal states. First liminal state is that in this current social context, people are being requested to be quarantined or self quarantined, and as a sector of social media is already being separated or marginalized from their daily lives. The second liminal space is where ritual or treatment and medical procedures are followed and succumbed to by the government rules and regulations. The state identifies and begins to categorize who are healthy and fit to survive and who are weak or rather abnormal in a certain sense of the term. The second threshold is somewhat an unsettling experience for participants as they have to undergo many medical and governmental procedures in order for them to prove that they are being transformed into the final phase of the ritual. Then the final stage is to reintegrate the newly transformed or quarantined individual to the social order. In the current context, the final liminal space for corona suspect is to free from the 14-day quarantine process, get back to his her own family life, and return to the social order and continue to participate in the ritual and perform the ritual in a safe and controlled environment. To conclude, I would sum this up by saying that I would also like to show what Antonin Artaud, the French theatre actor director, half a century ago, compared and discussed affinities between theatre and play. He wrote, the play takes dominant images, latent disorder, and suddenly carries them to a point of most extreme gesture. Theatre also takes gestures and develops them to a limit, just like plague. It reforges the link between what does and what does not exist, between the virtual nature of the possible and the material nature of the existence. Therefore, we need to look at the in betweenness that we all experience in the wake of the corona outbreak. It is the transformation of the rites of passage of life and death. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
It was a wonderful session. We are having a wonderful session. We have professors from different universities and colleges also, from our colleges too. First of all, I'd like to request SK Sinha sir, Dr. SK Sinha sir, to please
And
share his observation. Sir, please. Sir, please unmute your mic.
I think his mic is unmuted. Yeah.
Sir, it's still muted, sir. Please unmute.
Mute.
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Now,
Yes, sir.
answer.
Yeah, can you? So, first of all, let me thank Professor Anita Singh for this brilliant lecture or brilliant talk. I enjoyed it,
Thank you.
and uh, this was really very enlightening. But may I ask a few questions,
Sure. Yes.
or may I suggest something?
Yes,
Like
please.
you quoted that event of Jyoti Kumari,
Yes, yes, yes.
who cycled her father from Gurgaon to Darbhanga. Now, when I think
Yeah.
of her, I think of your topic, politics and
Yes.
pandemic. Right?
Yeah.
She did this act hmm, for the love of her
Yes.
father, but so many people hmm, rallied around her from political field. Hmm. Why did they do so?
It
Were
also,
they really appreciating? Were, were they really appreciating the act of Jyoti Kumari, or they were projecting and promoting themselves? That is my question, because it
Ivanka
is,
had also tweeted. Ivanka Trump had also tweeted.
yeah.
Uh,
Because what I feel is that they were not interested
yes,
they were not interested in Jyoti and her father. They were
yes,
interested in the fact that a girl had brought her father from Gurgaon, and
yes,
this was an opportunity for them. Hmm. What we say in Hindi, अपनी राजनीतिक रोटी
yes,
सेकना.
yes,
Ah,
exactly,
so
exactly.
many people. Ah,
Yes,
so this is what they did.
yes, exactly, exactly. So my point was when I bought Jyoti Kumari was no, I bought it in that section when I say gender and intersectionality. So one hand you have women posting pictures of saris on Facebook and other media, post a
Yeah,
picture sari challenge. I mean it is called sari challenge, and then there is this whole pandemic cookery, so you
yeah,
have
yeah.
pandemic cookery, sari challenge, yoga exercises, gym, and on the other hand is this class difference, the gendered class difference. Of course it was cashed on by all political leaders to show the divide between
Right,
the
right,
women.
right.
One class is safely
As
encompassed, cocooned in the comforts of their home, and the other class is, so this divide becomes, so the performativity of the divide. Basically my idea was to show the performativity of the divide and how it becomes so visible.
exactly,
It is becoming so visible.
exactly. As someone has said that let us convert this corona into an opportunity, and
Yes,
everyone is trying to convert it into an opportunity.
yes, exactly.
Politicians are converting it into their own political interests.
Yes.
Another point that I want to make, which made you
Yes.
you know this has implications on the economic front, no doubt about it, but it too has implications on the social front also.
Yes. Obviously. Yes.
Social front, like we have been talking of physical distancing, but somehow I feel that it has brought in some emotional distancing also.
Exactly.
And I'm not a worshipper of human beings. I don't worship them like Shakespeare did. What a piece of work is
What
man.
is
I
man? Yeah.
totally disagree with him. I totally disagree with Shakespeare when he talks so great about human beings. Human beings are basically a very selfish species.
Yes.
An individual human being thinks of himself or herself only, and all these relationships are all shams, and this is coming out in the time of this pandemic also. Like a son
Yes. Very.
refused to do the last rites of his father, and similarly a son was not allowed to enter into the house by their parents.
Mm.
What does that indicate? What emotional distancing it has brought in us, and what selfishness that we want to live. I want to live at the cost of my son. I want to live at the cost of my father's life. I would like to react. I would like you to react to this.
You're very true, Professor Sinha. I absolutely agree with you that this virus has, revealed the very baser side of human nature. You know, no animal kills just for revenge or jealousy or something. For acquisition of material
Exactly.
good. It kills only for hunger. Probably humans are the only being who have such complexities of emotions, and selfishness is one of them, which has, the performativity of selfishness has come out very clearly. I also heard horrifying stories of villagers who have walked or cycled or hitchhiked from
Yes.
Haryana and Punjab and Delhi and Gujarat way back to their villages, but they were not allowed to enter the villages. In fact, they were told you camp outside the village and you stay there till we are sure. So there are very horrifying stories of selfishness, stories that really don't really do much good to humanity. To talk about humanity in celebratory terms, we hardly can talk about humanity in celebratory terms. So that is what I said, that on the one hand, you have people suffering, and here you have Corona, culinary, recipes floating on online.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
We can be so
So,
insensitive also. So the insensitivity
so
is of course becoming very
yeah.
visible to us every day.
So Corona been so contradictory in so many things. It's full of contradictions. On the one hand, we want to save humanity. Such big words like saving humanity, serving humanity from Corona, and at the same time, we are showing our baser sides. So this has once again proved that we are the most, I mean, how should I put it? We are a brute. We are a brute of all
Lower
brutes.
order animals.
Yeah, yeah. We are worse than animals.
Worse than, yes, exactly. That's very true. I agree. I absolutely agree, and I'll incorporate your points also. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If anyone else want to share the views,
Are
we
they
have
putting the question in that chat box? I think they're typing the question in the chat box.
yes, ma'am. Before that, we had Huma ma'am saying something in the chat box.
Okay.
Ma'am, if yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, actually, particularly when ma'am started about mentioning about the war and how particularly pandemics and all, and like from time immemorial, they have been associated with this war terminology and this kind of symbolism. So essentially, ma'am, can you throw some light that why essentially this gives this sort of pandemics that gives rise to the usage of such terminology, and why human beings essentially they are enamored by some kind of rift or animosity. We are like more taken in by some things rather than being maybe talking about things on some other level, maybe on a more learned way that we can interact about such pandemics and all.
Yeah, that was actually what I was trying to critique. That why do we have to bring in the war imagery everything? We are at war with everything. So there's this kind of a toxic masculine way of handling everything. Why do we have to be always at war with something? It's a non-human thing. This virus. So why do we have to use such strong imagery? And these imageries are very motivational. They motivate us like you become the leader of it, you are the army general, and the whole becomes your soldier, and you have a larger cause, you are protecting the nation. So a kind of a paternalistic, tenor is there, a paternalistic tone and tenor that now I am your protector. I am your protector. I am there to protect you. So as I said, a kind of a paternalistic tenor is there, and a kind of a toxic masculinity, one would say. That you need to be very violent to be protected. You need to have very violent actions in order to protect something. There can be other ways in which we can look at the virus. But look at how the entire states of the world have responded to it in such aggressive terms. The terminology that is used, I was also kind of critiquing this aggressive way in which we are handling it. We don't need necessarily to handle it in an aggressive way. When you look at the freedom movement, Gandhi brought in a turn. Gandhi brought in a turn from aggressive, masculine opposition to colonial rule to a very feminized way of looking at it. Because you bring in this kind of an idea of aggressiveness in your way of thinking. So he wanted a nation that would not be aggressive, that would not be militaristic. That for every cause you have to be at war with somebody. There are other ways to approach an opponent, so to say, an adversary, an opponent, or an issue that is at hand that is troubling you. Even, for instance, the colonial rulers. So there was a way he said non-violent movement. Non-violent movement, non-cooperative movement. We'll not cooperate with you. We'll be non-violent. We'll be silent. We'll go on fasting. So these are non-aggressive ways of handling a national crisis, a crisis. So we have given it up. We may eulogize Gandhi, we may do memorials, we may celebrate his day, but we're not adopting his ways of handling crisis. So that was what I was trying to keep, when I said, can we deny that there is a correlation between the increase of the youth war, battle, violence in society? So because it generates violence, it is generative of a certain way of being. It is the generative. This kind of terminologies, what do they do in long term? They generate a kind of a pattern of behavior. They're patterning a society. They are creating a patterns in society. That this is the right way to handle a crisis. So if you encounter a crisis, how do you handle it? As war, as aggression. That's not there. That's not right actually all the time. So that was actually what I was saying. So I'm with you in that.
Thanks a lot for answering so beautifully. And essentially, ma'am, you are absolutely right that we as a society are becoming more barbaric rather than moving towards be getting more civilized, I think. So, like all this war terminology and things like that. So, like that is, I think we as a society are not progressing towards a more civilized way of dealing with things. That is
Yes, exactly. So I think there is a question that says, are we becoming, is the pandemic making us political or something? Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am. There are questions from students in the chat box.
Okay.
Should I read it, or you'll be answering, ma'am,
I
from
can't
there?
see the questions. I don't know why. The questions are, even as they're typing it, it pops up, but then it disappears.
Ma'am, there is an option at the right hand side at the top. You
Okay.
can see a chat box there.
No, I think that, I know, but the chat, yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. I got it now. Right.
Okay, ma'am.
Has
Okay, ma'am.
shaken human existence, ma'am. We really said everything is political, not just the pandemic. So, Atya Parveen, so I'm responding to you. You say, do we really said that pandemic affects politics, uh, policies? It is always very political. What are the factors that are governed by performative studies? So performative or performance studies. Basically, the term is performance studies, and it is very widely. It's this discipline. It has become a discipline, and this discipline is widely popularized by Richard Sechner, by Duet Conquergood, and so many others who are popularizing it. So, and it has come up as a disciplinary area in so many universities in the West. And in India, probably Ambedkar University, you have this discipline. So, performative studies everything basically. Everything is performative. So, they start from the premise that everything is performative. We are all performing all the time. As Shakespeare rightly said, the whole world is a stage. We are only players. Every aspect of the life is performative. We are always performing. We have. I mean, if you examine our own self, if we analyze our own selves, we are performing at every point of time. We have different roles to play. Like as a teacher, you as a teacher or a student, you have a certain role to play. You as a mother or a wife, you have or a husband or a son or whatever, you have a different role to play. As a friend, you play a different role. Your vocabulary changes if you are with your friends, if you are with your teacher, if you are with your parents. Your role changes. You behave differently. You put on a certain behavior that is appropriate, and this appropriate behavior is also learned. And if you don't follow this appropriate behavior, your teacher probably will tell you, don't behave with your teachers like this. Or your parents will tell you, you can't talk to me like this. Because the way a child should talk to a parent is prescribed. It is there. So we learn these appropriate behaviors of acting or performing in our lives. So these are not, they are not genetically programmed, but we learn, as Butler says, through repetitive performance, through stylized repetitive performance. We reiterate a performance and we acquire it and we learn it. So it is learned behavior. As Professor Sinha will tell you, language is a learned behavior. It is always open-ended. It is open-ended. We are not programmed. So we did, when we were doing this course, so we had animal communication and human communication. For animals, it is programmed. It is genetically programmed. A dog in Paris will bark as a dog in Balia will do. Their barks will not be different, isn't it so? But for a human, we will speak differently. We speak differently. We act differently. We greet each other differently, and our ways of behaving different because it is a learned behavior. It is conventionalized. It is not genetically programmed in us. So that is it. So that is. I hope it answers your question, Varun Singh. Okay. So I can't see any more question, or are there questions before? As we know,
There are,
yeah. negative side, there are some positive. There are a lot of positive sides also. A lot of positive side. You have people, helping out, and people reaching out to people. Of course, everything has a positive and a negative side too. So,
Ma'am, we have Dr. Sanjay Yadav sir here with us. He wants to say something. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Professor Anita Singh. I am from Jamshedpur Cooperative College. I was listening to your lecture, and this is COVID-19 is, of course,
yeah,
quite a relevant issue these days. And I like the way you pondered over several aspects. You talked about the performativity of language and the political leaders all over the world using hyperbolic expressions. When Trump was elected, he said that let's make America great again.
yes, America.
And one should be living in a la la land to believe that America is not great. It has
Yes,
been great for so many years. And in India, during this pandemic, we saw our Prime Minister Narendra Modi comparing
yes,
this to the Mahabharata Yudh. And
yes,
he
yes.
said that give me 21 days, we would overcome this epidemic as well. So my query to you is, what goes into the psychology of these leaders to make to use such kind of language? Is it just political, or there is something uh, that goes beyond the political aspect as well?
I think Professor Sinha can answer this very well. So
Uh,
language. So I
yeah.
quoted Joel Austin, and he says
Hmm.
language has a communicative, part, and it has a performative part. So there is rhetorical language, this
Yeah.
metaphoric, hyperbolic language, are
Hmm.
and rhetorical speech are very often used by politicians because they create an effect, they incite an audience.
That's true.
They kind of they help to stimulate an audience. They
That's
stimulate,
true.
act as a stimulant. So
Hmm.
politicians make rampant use of hyper. Even poets use, the poet use hyperbolic expressions. My love is like a red rose. Nobody's love is like a red rose.
Yeah, but that is more to hoodwink the public or the recipients.
Uh,
It
yes, yeah, you can say that, and also
Yeah,
sometimes not necessarily to hoodwink,
yeah,
not necessarily to cheat, but it is more persuasive device. It is more of a persuasive device, like poets use
that's true.
foregrounding. Professor Sinha
Hmm.
wants to say something. I think no,
Yeah,
so it's you have to switch on
that's
your
that's that's
yeah.
right,
It's
man.
more
So I
fore-
just wanted to
yeah.
react to what Dr. Sanjay Yadav said. Hello, good evening, Sanjay.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How do
Yes,
you do?
the, yeah, I'm fine. I'm
We
okay. How are
we
you?
we we live hardly 500 meters apart, but we are
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
each other during this web lecture only. So
Yeah,
that explains our situation these days.
No, but at least this
that's
platform
right.
is bringing people together
Yeah,
who can
Yes,
see each other.
yes.
yeah,
That's some
So this is
consolation.
not only, this is not, these are not the days of only physical distancing, but emotional distancing too.
Emotional
As
that's
distress.
I
true. That's true. You pointed
commented.
that out. Yeah.
Ah, yes, I wanted to react to you why they are using such languages. Language
Yeah.
is culturally conditioned,
Yes.
and we in India talk in metaphors, and we take our metaphors from Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Hmm.
That's true.
So that's very normal because people do understand. People do understand these metaphors. कि it is
Yeah.
दिन की लड़ाई है, ये महाभारत है, हम जीत
Aha.
जाएंगे और हाँ और अन्याय की हार होगी, etc., etc.,
Mhm.
etc. This is so
We we
that's
we have been
culturally
fed.
so.
We have been fed on these metaphors for long, sir.
Even everyday
Yeah,
users
Yeah.
since
use these
since
metaphors. हम जाएंगे,
since
हम मर
childhood,
जाएंगे.
since
Yeah.
childhood,
That's
since
true.
childhood we have been fed on these
Yeah.
metaphors. So people
The
do
Yeah.
use it, and
Very
of
true,
course
sir. Mm.
they are converting this corona into an opportunity, maybe for
Mhm.
economic opportunity or for their personal promotion. All the politicians are trying to promote themselves. Another point that I would like to make, language is also used for provoking. If I want to provoke, I will use certain languages. आप क्यों डरे हुए हैं? बाहर आइए, पूरा हिंदुस्तान आपके साथ खड़ा हुआ है, डरिए मत.
Yeah.
And then you will get provoked and you will come out and say something. Say something wrong.
You will be
then
trapped.
that will be caught and then. Yeah. So language is a big trap.
Exactly.
That's true.
Big trap.
Big trap. Exactly. It's a trap. Language is never telling the truth all the time. It helps you to hide, it helps you to lie, it helps you to exaggerate, and so there's other functions of language. Language is not a transparent medium.
And Professor Anita, you rightly said we talk in hyperbole.
Yeah.
Hyperbole.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ma'am, can I ask one question?
Sure.
Where can we place ourselves after such technological advancement, because an invisible virus has locked us inside our house? We can say physically, we can say mentally. So where we can place?
Where has the virus locked us?
Yes.
in a digital space. In a digital space. So actually, it is so unsettling even for us. We don't know which space do we belong to. We don't know which space we belong to. So now we are almost all the time on the virtual space, on the digital space, isn't it? So this has happened for the first time for almost all of us on this earth, because it has been last 100 years when a pandemic has happened. So nobody, probably maybe just one or two or a couple of people, nobody has experienced this. So it's a first time experience for most of us. So it's very unsettling, and we are still not able to figure out where we are. So outside spaces become very threatening. So we are in the home shelters. In America, it is called home shelter. We are shelter at home. We are a shelter at home. So maybe for the comfortable class, so we map on to a different space that is a digital space, but not all are advantaged to have an access to this space also. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I can see a question on gender violence. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
So there's a question on gender violence and a question on transformation. Two questions.
Yes,
one says that how is it transforming? How is it transforming? So transformative potential of any performative. So this is also transforming, like this. We will not be the same after we emerge out of this liminal space. So if I take Turner's terminology, he says preliminal, liminal, and postliminal. So we are still in the liminal stage. So our preliminal activities are, we used to do this. We used to meet for conferences. These are preliminal activities. We used to meet, hug, hold hands, shake hands in a preliminary stage. But in the liminal stage, we are stuck in space. We are all stuck in space. So now post-liminal will be different. So when we emerge out of this, we will transform people. So even if you, if I take this everyday instance to a theatrical imagery. So in theater, when we enter a theater, so we are a different people. When you observe a performance piece, it changes you in certain ways, and then you come out a different person. So it is definitely going to transform the whole experience of being, as Professor Sinha says, social distancing, the multiple forms of distancing that we are experiencing. Of course, it is going to change us in very different ways. We still don't know, how we will emerge out of it when we, start functioning the way we did. Probably not exactly the way we did, but how do we emerge out of it? We still don't know how. Is it going to transform? But it definitely is going to transform. Of course, somebody said that gender violence, family is supposed to be a safe space. But for feminist theorization, family is a very violent space. The person is political slogan that the second wave feminist movement started, and they wanted state intervention in the homes, and even we still do not have what is it called, marital rape recognized as an offensible, cognizable offensible offense. But in most countries, marital rape is recognized as a cognizable offense. But in India, we still do not recognize it. So feminist theorists argue as a very political space where a lot of violence, discrimination for the women go on. A lot of politics goes on. Major decisions are taken by the men of the house, but what is to be cooked probably is asked. For the women, and even not that. Very often you will see women asking the men, "What do I cook today?" or "What is to be bought?" Make smaller decisions may be given to her, but larger decisions are usually assigned for the male members of the house. So lockdown, a lot of violence incidents are happening, and helpline centers will tell you how much there is a spike in SOS from women who are locked in homes. Nobody to rely on, nobody to go to, no place they don't have places to go out to and complain or tell people or give an vent to their problems that they are facing. So of course, for places where this happens, so it can be very critical for some women.
Saket, can I ask? Can I share some thoughts with her?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
I'm sorry. I hope I'm not detaining you, Professor Anita.
No, it's a pleasure. Okay. You are gulfing this emotional gap.
No, I was still stuck with this word politics and pandemic. Now, what my question is, or let me first say, in America, when the president announced lockdown, there was a big hue and cry, and there was a big protest. Like one lady came out and she was shouting, "This is my body, my choice."
Right. Yeah.
Right. And you have seen what has happened in India also. So many laborers walking on the streets in spite of the fact that they were asked to stay at home. Now, my question is, has democracy come in the way of controlling this pandemic?
Even in democracy, there are laws. Like there's this infectious disease act.
There are votes. But there are votes also. That is more important than law. Votes are more important than law in democracy, yes. And it is all because of votes that all this confusion has happened in India.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like every country is structured on a certain lines, and this infectious disease act, or what is it called? The act is I'm forgetting that act, but there is an infectious disease act also in. So in times of crisis, a state can impose an emergency. State is is empowered to impose an emergency, and that is what the state did. Started with Janata Curfew, and from Janata Curfew onwards, we are in a state of lockdown. And again, the lockdown has been imposed once again in some places. So the politics, when you have used the word politics, I have used it in a very larger context. Everything is very political every time. We as human beings, as you yourself started off, they're all very political. There's always, we all have an agenda, we all have an idea, we have an ideology. Somebody has asked a question, is performance an ideology? Everything is an ideology. We all nurture there are multiple perspectives, and no one can encompass or have an overarching or God-like vision. Nobody can have a God-like. We all have a multiple fragmented visions. We all have a multiple small visions, and we can see the polarization is so apparent in the chats, that in the discussions that you have on the television these days. When you look at these discussions, you don't know whom to side to. Because their ideas are so polarized. So we have become very polarized in the way we look at things. Whether it is, the migrant issue or any issue that we take up, opinions are even Sushant Singh's, suicide has become so polarized. If you look at the discussions that are happening, so the perspectives are it's so political. You pick up one thing and it turns out to be, and you see how political that it ultimately. Unfolds before you. It unfolds before you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, are there any more questions?
Saket, can I?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ma'am, it's not the question. Just I wanted to have your observation on this thing. I'm Dr. Neha Tiwari.
Yeah, Neha, right.
Can
You're
you see?
in Karim City
Yeah.
College? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I'm in Karim City. So I just wanted to say that, in Contagion movie, you referred that movie 2011.
Contagion, right there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that can art or cinema be so prophetic? Because what we saw in 2011 cinema is exactly happening, in Corona time. So, what's your take on this?
So actually, it was based on what was that thing called? That was based on a real life event. That was already based on what pandemic was it? What pandemic that was it based on? It was based on an actual pandemic. It was not
Because the
out of.
similar thing is happening that they have to keep
Yes,
social
so you
distancing,
can
and
compare because
the
all
entire concept of lockdown we never heard. So
we
for the
never
first
heard.
time in
Yes,
this,
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
So that was there in the movie, and then second time we heard here in the
Yeah, we heard
Corona
it,
time.
exactly.
So that was
So
quite surprising for me.
it looks very prophetic, but it was based on an actual incident. It did not have that pandemic did not have such far-reaching effect, or maybe we were not so much affected. We were not so much affected by that, flu that. I'm forgetting the name of that flu that became quite widespread. That the movie was based on the contagion. You know. So they were able to find a vaccine, and everything was resolved. So towards the end, everything was resolved. All nations are
Everything is resolved.
settled and
Yeah.
so on. So of course, it is very movies can be prophetic if they're designed on a particular lines.
True. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
This was a very enriching session for all of us, ma'am. Thank you so much for it. I would like to call Yaya sir now for the vote of thanks. Yaya sir, please.
Let's see. I haven't seen him.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
It was really a very enriching session.
You're still invisible. Your video is not high. Yeah, now I can see you. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a really enriching session, and we were all very much delighted to see you once again. At least all Karim City people and all those who have seen you in our seminar. Right. Thank you very much for bringing so much discussion into today's discourse, for bringing all those theorists and theory from different arenas in this course today. And thank you, Professor Sena sir and Anita ma'am once again for making a very lively question and answer session. Other participants like Kushwant ma'am, Sanjay sir, Huma Yaqub ma'am, those who participated today in the question and answer session. We are extremely thankful of our guest speaker on behalf of our department, on behalf of our college also. We are extremely thankful to our SK Sinha sir, Professor Huma Yaqub, Dr. Sanjay Yadav sir, Dr. Kushwant Kaur ma'am, Fakhruddin sir, Ejaz sir, Anwar Shahab sir, all the faculties that have joined from our college or from different colleges. And we are also thankful of the students who have joined us today. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you.
Participants are requested to please enter the correct email ID. We are getting a lot of errors. In the feedback form.
Fakhruddin sir is a very sincere listener. All the time.
बहुत ध्यान से सुनते हैं, एकदम आराम से। शुक्रिया।
थैंक यू यहिया साहब and Neha.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir.
और सॉरी
My pleasure.
आपको जगाने के लिए।
Okay.
Thank you so much.
थैंक यू। फकरू भाई, वेदर
हाँ जी जी, बोलिए सर।
क्या बड़े
बोलिए
आराम
भाई।
से सुनते हैं, बहुत सुकून से एकदम।
नहीं, सुकून का टाइम था ना असल में, इसलिए।
हाँ हाँ, सही।
बहुत अच्छा था भाई। कुछ
हाँ,
कुछ
ठीक
Very
ठाक।
good.
कुछ सवालात आ रहे थे, मगर क्या करें, अंग्रेजी का बात थी, ज्यादा बोल नहीं सकते।
अरे नहीं, ऐसा मत सोचा कीजिए,
अरे हाँ, आप हिंदी में पूछिए, और क्या।
क्या दिक्कत है।
नेक्स्ट टाइम देखा जाएगा इंशाल्लाह।
हाँ, इंशाल्लाह, बिल्कुल। और ये सोचना ही नहीं है कि मतलब किस लैंग्वेज में पूछ रहे हैं, सब लैंग्वेज अपनी है।
तो सही है।
ये अच्छे क्वेश्चंस आते हैं ना, तो बहुत सारे अलग पर्सपेक्टिव्स आ जाते हैं। जैसे किसी बच्चे ने अभी वो परफॉर्मेटिव स्टडीज के बारे में पूछा, तो वो आंसर उनका बहुत कुछ बताने वाला था।
नहीं, मेरे ज़हन में एक बात आ रही थी कि चाहे तो आप भी शेयर कर सकते हैं कि ये इस पेंडेमिक में सबसे ज्यादा जो सफर है डाउन ट्रोडन सेक्शन सोसाइटी है, जो पिछड़े वर्ग के लोग हैं, जिसे हम माइग्रेंट लेबर कहते हैं। ये लफ्ज ही एक तरह का कर्स है। व्हाई शुड वी से माइग्रेंट लेबर? वी आर ऑल माइग्रेंट लेबर। अगर हम देखें 90% तो लगता है नहीं कि कोई ये कह सकता है कि हम उसी जगह जॉब करते हैं जहाँ हमारे पैदाइश है। हर कोई कहीं ना कहीं से माइग्रेट किया है।
हाँ,
तो ये माइग्रेंट लेबर क्यों ये शब्द इस्तेमाल किया जाता है? दे आर द मेन स्टेक होल्डर। ये लेबर जो
ये
यहाँ से
असल में
शिफ्ट करके चले गए,
मीडिया ने शुरू कर दिया
मैं
और फिर वो चल
खत्म कर
पड़ा
दूं
है।
सर, मैं जो खत्म कर दूं, ये माइग्रेंट लेबर ही जो मेन स्टेक होल्डर है। इसलिए कि जो भी प्रोडक्शन से, चाहे वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्री हो, चाहे एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर, दे आर द मेन सोर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन। अगर
और
ये
हम
जो
लोग सब माइग्रेंट हैं सर।
ये जो यहाँ से
हाँ,
जो
हाँ,
हट गए
और
हैं,
सिंस एजेस, और मतलब ये कोई आज की बात नहीं है। पता नहीं कौन कहाँ से माइग्रेट होकर अब कहाँ पर है। तो हमारी धरती कौन सी है और आसमान कौन सा है, तो हमें पता ही नहीं है।
मगर आने वाला जो सफर है, ये पेंडेमिक जो है इकोनॉमिक पेंडेमिक में कन्वर्ट हो जाएगा। इसलिए कि
हाँ,
आने वाला समय जो है इकोनॉमिक पेंडेमिक में कन्वर्ट होने जा रहा है। इसलिए कि आप देखिए, लोग जॉबलेस हो गए, मगर अभी ये हो रहा है कि इंडस्ट्री में लोगों की अवेलेबिलिटी है, मगर लोग नहीं है काम करने के लिए। पंजाब से या कहीं भी जो प्रोडक्शंस के अभी जो आ रही हैं, लोगों को रिक्वेस्ट किया जा रहा है कि आप बिहार से लोग जा रहे हैं, भेजा रहा है। तो ये
वापस बुलाया जा रहा है।
एक विडम्बना है कि एक तरफ से हम लोग जॉबलेस होते चले जा रहे हैं, मगर दूसरी तरफ ये है कि सोर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शंस बढ़ाने के लिए सारे सोर्सेस हैं, मगर लेबर नहीं है। तो ये आने वाला दिनों में बहुत ज़्यादा ये क्राइसिस होने जा रहा है। इसको किस तरह
क्राइसिस होगा। हमको लगता है सर लोअर मिडिल क्लास भी बहुत ज्यादा अफेक्टेड हो रहा है।
वही
एक आध महीने तो उन्होंने किसी तरह